from, but there's only a few that rise above the rest. Today it is my privilege to introduce to you the wife of one of those candidates that I believe has both the experience and the knowledge and the character, everything that's needed to be one of those to you. And so I'm excited to have the privilege of being able to introduce you today to Mary Pawlenty. Let me tell you a little bit about her first. This is impressive, I have to tell you. Mary Pawlenty is clearly a loving wife. She is the mother of 2 daughters, Anna and Mara. Did I get that right? Oh, I'm sure if I got it wrong, they can correct me on that one. She grew up in Edina, Minnesota, the daughter of a home builder and a homemaker mother. She earned a bachelor's degree, summa cum laude, in political science from Bethel College before enrolling in the University of Minnesota's Law School, where she met fellow student Tim Pawlenty. After graduating cum laude in 1986, she moved to Houston, Texas to practice law for a year before returning to Minnesota to marry Tim Pawlenty in 1987. She quickly became an integral part of her husband's political activities. When former Governor Ann Carlson appointed then partner and civil litigator Mary Pawlenty to the bench in 1994, her ability to participate in political activities was curtailed by judicial standards of care. So after serving in the 1st Judicial District in Dakota County for almost 13 years, she stepped down in 2007. She currently works as a mediator/arbitrator at Gilbert Mediation. As First Lady of the state of Minnesota, Mary Pawlenty has worked tirelessly to support our nation's military and military families. She created the Military Family Care Initiative, a program that allows community-based organizations to volunteer their time and services to help families of deployed military service members. She was a recipient of the National Guard Association of the United States Distinguished Patrick Henry Award for her efforts. As First Lady, Mary Pawlenty created the First Lady's Heart Health Initiative, an awareness campaign for women about reducing the risk of heart disease. The First Lady also donated much of her time to educating Minnesota elementary school students about democracy in the 3 branches of government, especially the judicial branch. The First Lady has enjoyed accompanying her husband and representing Minnesota on overseas trade missions and travels across the globe. When we elect a president, we also know that we're getting a package deal, so it is really important because we're also knowing as much as we possibly can about the spouses of these candidates. I think you're going to be as impressed with Tim Pawlenty's wife as much as I am. So it is my privilege to introduce for you the former First Lady of Minnesota, Mary Pawlenty.
Introduction. I appreciate that very much, but more importantly, I appreciate you all for being here today and taking the time to come out and to get acquainted and to ask questions. And I will try to be brief because I know you would love to hear from my husband and to be able to quiz him and learn a lot more about his political positions and anything that you might be curious about. But let me just first tell you a bit from the heart. And as you might imagine, I am here to be not only supportive of him personally, but from a political standpoint, I could not possibly be more supportive of the fact that he's running for president. We have been married for almost 24 years, and I know him obviously as well as you can imagine that a spouse would know their spouse after all that period of time, and I have seen him in good times and challenging times, through joy and through trouble. I have watched him, and I can tell you that he is a man who has a depth of character that is second to none. His roots go down deep. I describe him as a strong oak. He is a man of courage and has the strength of his convictions. I've watched him throughout not only our family life, but of course throughout his political life. He was in the legislature for a period of 10 years and then of course governor for 2 terms. And I watched him battle the liberals in the state of Minnesota, and they were fierce battles, and there were times where I just thought, there is no way I don't know how he's going to manage this one. How is he possibly going to get through this particular battle? But every single time I watched him stand strong and was amazed. I had the opportunity as First Lady to be able to travel with him, for example, during trade missions, and we've been to China and India and South America and Europe and all over, and watched him as he just mastered issues of foreign policy. And often when you think of governors, you can think of them sort of in regional terms, but he is a student of foreign policy. He knows well the subject matter, but it's not just that. He knows well the impact on Minnesota businesses, and now obviously is someone who is well versed in the subject, and I'm sure that you'll have questions on that topic as well. But we were great supporters of the military in Minnesota. Our Minnesota National Guard is something which we were greatly proud. I had the opportunity, along with Tim, to visit our troops when they were in peacekeeping missions in Bosnia and Kosovo, and Tim has traveled too. I have not, but he's traveled to Iraq 5 times, Afghanistan 3 times. And these are just a little bit of a flavor of what I've been able to witness as my husband has gone through his political career. But let me take just another moment to tell you a bit more on the personal side of who he is. Tim grew up, maybe many of you know this, and perhaps you're coming here today, you do know a little bit about his background, but for those of you who don't, he was born and raised in South St. Paul, which originally was known for the size of its stockyards and meatpacking plants, and eventually those plants were shut down, and there was great economic challenge in South St. Paul. So he's seen economic challenge in his hometown. His mother died when he was 16 years old, and not long thereafter, his father, who was a trucker for much of his life, lost his job for a period of time. And I tell you that primarily so that you can understand this as an individual who has experienced real life. He has seen challenge. He knows economic challenge. He knows the importance of leaning into your faith, the importance of the strength of an extended family. He knows in tough times how also personal responsibility is important, but also how important it is to be optimistic. And he is by nature a very optimistic person. So I am completely confident and will tell you, not only from my heart, but also from my head, that I firmly believe that my husband has the wisdom and the judgment and the character, the experience, and the record to be the next president of the United States. So ladies and gentlemen, my husband, Governor Tim.
She's going to be a fabulous First Lady for the United States of America, as you can see. And I love her very much, and I wish she could come on every campaign trip. She can come on some of them, and she can't come on all of them because we have 2 teenage daughters at home. One of them drives, and they both like boys. And so they need supervision. And so Mary is able to come on some. I'm so grateful that she's on this swing that we're making across Iowa. Now, I love to come to Iowa for a number of reasons, including the similarities between my home state and Iowa. It feels very comfortable and familiar to me here. But one of the reasons I like to come is because it's one of the few places in the country where I can tell my corny Ole and Lena jokes and people get them, right? And so I gotta indulge me here. I got a good one for you. So, of course, you heard that Ole and Lena were together for a long time, and there was some bickering in the relationship, and they were arguing back and forth, and things didn't look like they were headed in the right direction. So Ole decided they needed some counseling and some help, and so Ole went to a counselor. And he was telling the counselor about this tension, this bickering back and forth in the relationship, and the counselor said, "Oh, Ole, my goodness, this is easy to fix. All you need to do is clear your head and get some fresh air and exercise and just walk every day 2 miles for 2 weeks, 14 days, and you'll be fine." Well, I said, "Okay, I will." And so a counselor, 2 weeks went by, a counselor picks up his phone and calls Ole, and he catches Ole on his cell phone. And he says, "Ole, how are things going? Have they improved with Lena? Are things getting better?" And Ole says, "Well, how would I know? I'm 28 miles away from home." It's a little story about drifting away from home. That's what I want to talk to you about today, about our country being adrift, moving away from and drifting away from those values and those principles that made us great. I'm running for President of the United States because I love this country, and it's in trouble. But I've got the experience and the leadership and the values and the ideas to lead it to a better place. And I think before we launch into the solutions going forward, we need to step back and understand how we got to this point, how we got into this mess. And so you had Barack Obama come campaigning through here some years ago as a candidate for President of the United States, and you heard him many times before. now that he's been President of the United States. And he said a number of things that haven't turned out to be true. He's made a number of promises that have been broken. And let me give you a few examples. He said, pass this government stuffed up pork stimulus bill, or unemployment could go as high as 8%. And of course it went to 10%, and it's still around 9%. And then he came to Iowa and other places and looked you in the eye. And he said, you know, if you elect me president, I'll do health care reform, and we need it. But remember back then when he was a candidate, he said we're going to do it with the Republicans. He was opposed to the individual mandate as a candidate. He said he was going to work together to get it done. And he said he was going to focus on cost containment. Then he went to Washington, D.C., and passed an unconstitutional piece of legislation that I think is one of the worst pieces of legislation in the modern history of the country. The whole thing should be repealed. Presiding over an economy now where we've got nearly $4 a gallon gas, crushing levels of unemployment, a federal government that is drowning us and suffocating the country in debt and deficit, and he's inept. He has no clue about how to move the country forward in terms of private sector economy growth and job growth in this country. And so we need to make sure that we send him the message, and the message is, in order to get a country that's moving in a new and better direction, we're going to need a president who's got a new and better promise and vision for America. Now, this president has a campaign plan, but he doesn't have an economic plan. And we got a lot of work to do in this regard. So I want to just share with you a few thoughts about where I'm headed going forward in this campaign, my vision for America. But the way forward is not particularly easy, but it's not complex. We know what made this country great. We can look back and see the values and ideas and principles that made this country great. We just need to bring them forward to the challenges of our time and apply them in our time, and we'll continue to be the greatest nation the world has ever known. But it starts with looking each other in the eye and telling each other the truth about the real challenges this country's facing and how we got into this mess. And so when I kicked off my campaign in Des Moines a few weeks ago, I said, even in Iowa, there's going to be some tough truths. But I can't be the leader of this country unless I'm willing to tell the truth, do it courageously, even if at the moment it's unpopular. But part of leadership is to get people to mobilize and to raise awareness around the challenges and offer the solutions too. So I came to Iowa and I said, look, given the hole that we're in, we're going to have to phase out the ethanol subsidies over time. And I wasn't just picking on ethanol. I said, we're going to have to look at all the subsidies and be fair about it across all the platforms, and look at reducing or eliminate all the subsidies as many as we possibly can. But even in Iowa, I was willing to tell people the truth about the challenges ahead and the courage it's going to take to get this thing fixed. I went down to Florida and talked to seniors and next generation leaders about what it's really going to take to fix Social Security. And for anybody on the program or near eligibility for the program, we won't change it at all. But for the people coming up in the next generation, the new entrants into the workforce, there's going to be some changes, and we'll give them a couple decades or more of notice so they can prepare accordingly. I went to Washington, D.C. I told the government employee unions and the people who are getting paid by the taxpayers, you can't get a better deal in terms of compensation and benefits and the like than the people paying the bill, the taxpayers. And so we need to reconcile those things. And then I went to New York and told the Wall Street bankers, who got their snouts in the trough as deep and as bad as anybody else, it's time for them to get out of the government deal as well. And no more handouts, no more carve-outs, no more bailouts, none of that. And on down the list. Now these are hard things to say, but you know in your heart, you know in your gut, this country's in big trouble. It's going to take strong and courageous leaders to move this forward. Every Republican candidate is going to stand before you and say many of the same things. You're going to have everybody come here and say, look, as a Republican or a conservative, I'm for cutting taxes, I'm for cutting spending, I'm for health care reform in terms of private sector instead of government. They'll say they're for reforming schools through school choice. They'll say, like I will, that I'm pro-life, strongly pro-life and strongly traditional marriage. They'll say they're for welfare reform and public employee compensation reform and immigration reform and the like. And you'll listen carefully and you'll say, well, what's the difference then between all of these candidates if they're saying so many of the things? And one of the main differences that I hope you'll consider is this. There's a big difference between talking about this stuff and doing it. And we've had enough of Barack Obama and his fancy speeches and his 3 years of soaring rhetoric of empty promises and bad results for our country. America deserves better. And so in Minnesota, one of the toughest political environments for a Republican in the country. Now keep in mind, this is the state of McCarthy and Mondale and Humphrey and Wellstone and Ventura and now United States Senator Al Franken. So as Frank Sinatra would sing about New York, if you can do it there, you can do it anywhere. And I did it statewide in Minnesota, in a tough state. But we didn't just talk about these things, we did them. So out in our bus that we're traveling around, and it's the road to results is the theme of this week's tour. And it's talking about not just flapping our jaws, not just having a debating society, but rolling up our sleeves and putting our head down and putting our shoulders back and driving this thing to conclusion on the results. So in Minnesota, we took spending from historic highs to historic lows. We cut taxes net over my 8 years as governor, even though we had 2 recessions during that time. We did school reform by doing things like offering teachers statewide the opportunity and in fact the responsibility to move from seniority pay to performance pay, paying teachers for results. We did public employee compensation reform before it was cool and popular in the press. We did it years ago. In fact, it included a 44-day shutdown of the transit system in my state. We had bus drivers who worked 15 years. And then they wanted to retire and be eligible for government-paid health insurance for the rest of their life after working just 15 years. And I said, we're shutting that off. The bus driver said, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I am. I said, no, you're not. We're going out and start. I said, go ahead. They said, Governor, within a few days, once you don't have buses run in the 15th largest metropolitan area in the country, you'll be begging us to come back to work. I said, we'll see about that. 44 days later, a month and a half later, one of the longest transit strikes in the history of the country, they came back to the table and said, we hope that we can find a way out of this. And I prevailed. And I had people standing outside my window with signs, bedroom window with signs, Pawlenty is a weapon of mass transit destruction. And so we had all of the protests, all of the angst that you see on television playing out these days, but we got it done because we drew some lines in the sand around common sense conservative principles and backed it up. We did welfare reform, and litigation reform, and immigration reform. And so that's one thing I hope you'll consider amongst many. You got all these candidates coming here flapping their jaws, and there's one candidate who's actually done all this stuff in a very difficult environment. You put somebody in the Oval Office, we learned the hard way what happens with Barack Obama when you put somebody there with no executive experience, no real leadership experience. I mean, my goodness, he was a community organizer, he was a college professor, he was in the United States Senate long enough to have a cup of coffee before it got cold. He never ran anything, he never did anything of consequence. Then we put him in the Oval Office and wonder why it's not working. This is historically challenging times for the country. We need somebody in that office who's run something large under difficult circumstances, with a public component to it and driven it to conclusion. So I hope you'll consider that as you go forward. And then lastly, I just want to tell you, I know the American dream because I've lived it. Mary mentioned my background. And this country is the greatest country the world has ever known. And there's a reason for that, because people have a sense of hope and optimism and strength and positive outlook for the future. And it's not based on hype and rhetoric or speeches. It's based upon what we know works. And if we went around this room and talked to you about your hopes and dreams and successes and ups and downs and your American story and your American dream, we'd hear some compelling stories, but I doubt many of them would involve how the bureaucracy came into your life in a glorious way and transformed it to the positive. I think we'd hear about faith and family and church, and we'd hear about hard work and what it means to build something or try something new and to share and to support others, not because the government makes you do it, but because that's the soul and heart and spirit of America. What we've got now is a government that every day, in ways sometimes you don't even notice, creeps into your life and takes over one more piece of what was your responsibility or what was once the province of family or neighborhood or church or charity or the private market or entrepreneurs. And when they do that, they not only run up their budget, they not only expand their footprint, but they do something else that is unraveling our country. They begin to weigh down and discourage the American spirit. And that spirit is inside of us, and it's people saying, I can do this, I can be responsible, I can get this done. I've got a can-do, hopeful attitude, and it doesn't involve the government taking everything over. And when they tax us and regulate us and weigh us down and say no to us or slow it down, make it more difficult, make it more discouraging, make it more uncertain, every time they do that, They take away one more piece of that American spirit and our freedom. I'm not going to let that happen anymore as President of the United States. In fact, we're going to get this country moving again with a positive, energetic, hopeful vision for the future. The way forward won't be easy, but it's not complicated. We know what works. We know what the value lessons are over the chapters of success of this country. And those of us who see it, those of us who know it, and you know what it is, need to rise up here today, figuratively and literally, and take back this country and get it moving on a better path. If security were easy, everybody around the world would be secure, and they're not. And if prosperity were easy, everybody around the world would be prosperous, but they're not. And if freedom were easy, the core, the essence of America, freedom, were easy, everybody around the world would be free, but they're not. It takes strong people who understand it, who are seeing it, who are willing to roll up their sleeves and fight for it. And whom this party puts forward as the next nominee for President of the United States is going to say a lot about the future direction for this country. We got a tremendous opportunity. President Obama's numbers nationally aren't very good. And if you look at the swing states, his numbers are awful. The main way we're going to goof this up as Republicans is to nominate the wrong candidate. And Iowa has this deserved position of being the first caucus state in the nation. But you don't just want to be first, you also want to be right, so that the value of the Iowa process remains in that deserved position, but also let you influence the trajectory of this country. And who you slingshot out of Iowa, starting with the Ames straw poll in a couple of weeks on Ames 13th and ultimately in the caucuses, it's going to set the table for the rest of the race. I just encourage you strongly to make sure that that person, and I know you will, is somebody who's fully capable of not just being good in Iowa in that moment, but who can really be the nominee for the whole conservative coalition, and who can really be President of the United States and do it really well under the most challenging and important circumstances that our country has faced in the modern history of the country. Because we're going to beat Barack Obama. We just need to make sure we have the candidate who can do it. And every candidate's going to say they can. But I did, as a moving conservative. I got elected and re-elected in one of the most liberal places in the country, not by acting like a Democrat, but by getting Democrats and independents and Republicans to support our conservative cause. And we moved our state in a historic way in a conservative direction. That's what I did for Minnesota. That's what I can do for the country, not based on words, but based on the record of results. And I want to make sure that you know I won't let you down as president. And I'm sure hope you'll support us at the Ames straw poll on the 13th. Thanks for coming today. I look forward to your questions and comments. Sir, go ahead. Nice socks, by the way.
Oh, thank you. You said that politicians get away with things that put businessmen in jail. I've often wondered, if you are not a wealthy man, how do you support yourself? How do you make the mortgage payments when you're running for president?
Yeah, well, we have a number of things. I've worked as governor for 8 years. It's a $120,000 or so a year job, so we saved some money. We have worked over the last 30 or 40 years real hard. Mary's a mediator, so she continues to be employed. I've given a few paid speeches recently, but basically we're living off our savings. Or not. And, hopefully that won't be forever. Yes, sir.
Do you believe in abortion?
I'm strongly pro-life. In fact, the question was, do I believe in abortion? The National Review Online, which is a conservative publication, did a summary of all the candidates in this race, again, based not on rhetoric, but based on results. And they wrote up that I was the most pro-life candidate in this race.
How about same-sex marriage?
I'm strongly in favor of traditional marriage and was the co-author of the Defense of Marriage Act when I was in the legislature in Minnesota. Again, check the tires, kick the tires, don't just listen to the rhetoric. Now, one other thing that's very important here. I appointed the first conservative majority of justices on the Minnesota Supreme Court in the modern history, and maybe the entire history of the state of Minnesota. So when people say they're going to do that, I did it. And my rule was no ninnies on the court. I wanted to make sure that we had people on there who were strict constructionists, who would apply the law only as written, and if there was a lack of clarity in the law, that they had the humility and the restraint to step back and say, it's not my place to insert my personal views or my political views into that space. Those are the kinds of people we want on the court, and we want them to share our values. We want them to be strict constructionists. We want them to respect the paramount importance of the law as written, particularly the Constitution. And we've got a court, not not so much these days, but in the past it has been really well beyond that definition. Let's go way in the back, we'll keep going, yeah, in the green.
Okay, I understand that figures came out that 51% of the Americans pay no taxes at all, and 49% of the middle and upper class pay taxes. I hope I've not got the figures reversed, but I want to know what you plan about taxes and what do you plan? Are you in favor of a flat tax?
Well, first of all, the figures vary a little bit depending on which groups you look
You
at, but
list-
you're basically right. The Associated Press reported not long ago that 47% of the American people, adults, pay no federal income tax. Now, they pay
Right.
sales tax and some other tax,
Right.
but they pay no federal income tax. Now, when you reach the point where you got more people riding in the wagon than you got pulling the wagon, you got a problem in a democracy, and we're almost there. Now, to be fair to that number, that includes people who are on fixed income and Social Security that are not taxable, but they paid into the system earlier, and part of that's,
And they deserve that.
yes. So keep in mind, the number's probably a little inflated for that reason, but still, it's a
Well,
concerning number.
I got it
Yeah.
from Fox News.
Still a concerning number. So what do we need to do about that? Well, a number of things. We need to make sure that we have a tax system that is as flat and transparent as possible. So if you have time, go on Pawlenty.com and look at the economic speech I gave in Chicago. It's posted on the website. It goes into great detail. But it says, let's have one flat tax and fair tax, flat tax for the country on the corporate rate. One rate, go from 35% to 15%, and then clean out the exemptions, credits, and deductions underneath that. And that will have a flat business tax rate and a dramatically reduced tax rate, flat, simple, open, transparent, more pro-growth, more pro-investment. Now, on the individual side, go to 2 rates. We didn't go all the way to 1, but we went to 2, from 6 to 2. So dramatically flatter. The reason we did that is we didn't think we could get in one leap all the way to a flat tax. And then we said repeal the tax on interest, dividends, capital gains, and the estate tax as well. Those kinds of changes and more would ignite the economy. We know that from history. It always happens. If we had that kind of pro-growth tax relief in this country and reform, we'd have a flatter, simpler tax code, but we'd also have a booming economy. Let's go to the gentleman with the red striped shirt.
I guess one of George Bush's greatest pro-life policies was his global AIDS program, which has saved millions of lives over the years. But I read in the Morning Register an editorial saying that you were in favor of cutting this global AIDS program as president. Is this true?
We're going to have to cut foreign aid in a variety of forms. And so there's some people that say just eliminate all of it. I'm saying in the context of a budget problem, we're going to have to cut foreign aid. As to which particular subcategories get cut and how much and how that, we'll have to work through all of that. But you can't be truthful and look people in the eye and say we can climb out of this hole without cutting many things. And foreign aid is going to have to be one of them.
So you are in favor of cutting global AIDS programs?
I'm in favor of what I just said, and I said we haven't gotten into the details yet of which programs would be cut by what amount. Yes?
What will be your plan to secure our borders, and what would you do with the millions that are already here?
Great question. Relating to the border and the people who are here illegally. First of all, we are a country based on the rule of law, and we need to have a country that has behavior and the law line up with each other. And if the rule is anything goes, pretty soon it does. And if you don't believe me, if you remember visiting New York pre-Giuliani, you saw an example of anything goes. And it gets ugly fast. And so we want to make sure that we have behaviors that conform to the law. We're based on a country based on the rule of law. On the border, when President Bush said which governors will volunteer to send their National Guard to the border to enforce the border, again, record, not rhetoric, results, not rhetoric. Only a few governors volunteered to do it. I was one of them. I think I was the first one. I ordered our Minnesota National Guard to the Arizona border as part of an effort to reinforce the border. It's not just an immigration issue, it's a security issue. The first job of the federal government is to make sure this nation is secure and our people are secure. That's a really important issue. And then the second thing I would do for immigration, and again, I've done this all. I had an executive order requiring people to use E-Verify. I issued an executive order requiring visa expiration dates to be right on the front of driver's license and much more. But as it relates to the people who are here illegally, they're here illegally. And one of the things I think we should do is say, if you want a job or you want public benefits, you got to prove that you're here legally. And if you can't get either of those two things, the magnet for them coming or staying gets shut off. And that's the quickest and easiest way to deal with most of the illegal immigration problem, is move from this paper-based system, or a system where nobody checks for public benefits, or an outdated fraud-filled system on employment, to an electronic system that tells people quickly, easily, and accurately whether somebody's here illegally or not. That would dry up most of the problem. Sir, in the back.
Yeah, let's imagine that you're successful, you win the nomination, you then are elected president. I like that you've got results and that rhetoric on the banner, your bus is the road to results, those are all good things. You indicated the president has a no economic plan, but he has a campaign plan. What are the 3 to 5 top things that you would do that you'd be able to enact with kind of some intransigence on the far left and some intransigence on the far right, a Democratic Senate and a Republican House? And what are they actually worth in terms of results, in terms of jobs or dollars, to really get us back on track?
Well, when people talk about split Congress, I never had a Republican legislature in Minnesota. For a while I had a Republican House, but in the last part of my governorship, the whole thing was Democratic. So when we put up these results, not rhetoric, it was done without a Republican legislature. And it wasn't easy. And so I had the first government shutdown in 150 years in Minnesota on my watch over tax and spending issues. I set a record for vetoes. I took more money out of the budget using executive authority in my 8 years as governor than all the other 142 years worth of governors combined. Had big fights with the public employee unions, like I mentioned, and many other big battles, and we won them most. Now, was it easy? No. Was it always popular? No. Do I have some battle scars? Yes. Did I make some mistakes? Yes. Did I learn a lot along the way? Yes. But what we could do as president, top things would be these. Number one, don't assume that the Congress is going to be split. I would suggest to you that a more likely scenario now is the Republicans will keep the House. And if you look where those Senate seats are across the country, it's very favorable to Republicans. The nature of where those retirements occurred and where the seats are opened in the U.S. Senate favor Republicans dramatically. So it's quite hopeful that Republicans will control not just the House, but the Senate. And if that happens, the only thing standing between what we believe occurring and not is going to be who occupies the White House, which is more important than ever to get Barack Obama out of there. Now, as to what I would do these things in this order. One, propose to Congress, if it's Republican, to repeal Obamacare in its entirety and start over and get real health care reform done. Two, and if you can't get that done because the Democrats are in control of Congress, then I would issue an executive order exempting the states or waiving the states from their need to comply with Obamacare as much of it as possible. Two, I would ask the Congress to pass a pro-growth, pro-investment, pro-job tax reform bill like we were talking about earlier in response to the lady's question in the green shirt. And then three, I would do regulatory reform. There's a great group here in Iowa called Strong America Now. Maybe you've heard of it. They're going to be a big part of the discussion. I actually did a big chunk of that in Minnesota. They use a process called Lean Six Sigma. And when we applied that to our federal agencies in terms of permitting time, efficiency, better customer service, it works and it saves money. So I implement regulatory reform through executive order or legislative action. And by the way, our businesses across the country complain about that as much as they do taxes. They're really worried about the regulatory uncertainty and burdens, cost, expense, slowness in many, many industries, and that would be a big relief to the economy as well. Let's go to the young man in the red shirt.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I'm from the Marshalltown area. My question for you is, do you believe in absolute truth, and what is it based on?
Do you like maid rights?
Yeah.
All right, I had a chance to make some maid rights last time I was here. But I believe there is absolute truth, and for me and Mary, we're people of faith. We believe in God, we believe in the Bible, and that's not a politically incorrect statement. That's a statement that this country was founded on. You go back to our founding documents. There are many, many eloquent examples, but to give you just a couple, in the first sentence of the first paragraph of the Minnesota Constitution, it says this: "We, the people of Minnesota, grateful to God for our civil and religious liberties," and then it goes on from there to talk about the importance of perpetuating those blessings to future generations. And so the notion is our freedoms, our liberties, our privileges come from our Creator, not from our member of Congress or our county commissioner or our city council member. So we need to be a country that turns towards God, not away from God. And there are many, many other examples of that in the national founding documents as well. So for us, we believe there is an absolute truth, and we believe it's God inspired and God delivered. Ma'am?
I wondered if you could just comment a little bit on your thoughts of our national debt, the debt ceiling, and China.
Sure. Just a few small life issues. Do it all in 60 seconds. Well, the debt ceiling issue is a proxy for bigger problems that have been brewing for a long time. And again, we need to look each other in the eye and be honest and say that both parties, over a long period of time, have contributed to this mess. In the White House and the Congress over a lot of decades. But it's also true that this president has made it exponentially worse, recklessly worse. And he needs to be held to account for that. The country is sinking and drowning in debt. And just to give you a few measures, not to bum you out, but in the hour or so that you're here, the federal government will spend $144 million that they don't have. Every hour, every day, every week, every month. They take in about $2.2 trillion a year in revenue, and they send out $3.5 trillion. So they spent in deficit last year alone $1.5 trillion, about the same this year, and trillion-dollar deficits more or less for as far as the eye can see. 40,000 a second they don't have. 40,000 a second that they don't have. It is an absolute Ponzi scheme. The people who have run this and who are running this, if they were in the private sector, they'd probably be indicted. This is Bernie Madoff style accounting. It is really bad. So this is going to be the main battle going forward, the economy, government spending. And Barack Obama, we know what works. Ronald Reagan taught us what works. It's free markets and free enterprise. What Barack Obama believes is in centralized planning on everything. He's got a problem, he wants to drag it into government. We want to take stuff out of government and get it back into the private sector. On the debt ceiling, I wrote an op-ed in February. It was the first national voice to do this, that said this: don't buy the false choice between raising the debt ceiling and Barack Obama's threat of default. Order the Treasury now, this was early in the year when they had more time, to sequence the payments so that you pay the outside obligations first, so there is no default, and then the most important things in sequential order: the military, Social Security, and the like. Now, eventually you run out of money because there's not enough money to pay the bills, but at the point at which you run out of money, you've narrowed the problem down to discretionary domestic spending that needs to probably be reformed and reduced anyhow. So you put yourself in a better spot in terms of narrowing the debate. And these politicians, they always say, someday we're going to make the tough decisions. One day we're going to make the tough decisions. And pretty soon we're going to make the tough decisions. We really are going to make the tough decisions. And they never do. So this is a dramatic moment. It's a back up against the wall moment. It's gut check time. It's awkward. It's unnerving to a lot of people. But they need to stand strong because these are the moments where you can get big stuff done. That's what I found as governor of Minnesota. So I wish they wouldn't raise it. But you should know that the Secretary of the Treasury, Geithner, said they already busted through it in May. So you got a lot of people debating whether it should go up above 14.3 or not. He would say that they already spent 14.5. So they're already through it. Now they're using internal accounting mechanisms to move money around to pay the bills above 14.3. So I'm in support of this. I don't believe anymore that politicians are going to go to Washington, D.C. and control themselves. I hope they do. Most don't. So I think we have to put systems in place that put up guardrails for these people. And I think we have to put up a constitutional amendment to balance the budget. And 49 of the 50 states have it. It works. You can create exceptions for war and emergency and the like. But we have to put some guardrails up so that the folks we send to Washington, D.C. keep the car on the road and they're not doing it. Then I would peg spending to a percent of GDP so they can't just raise taxes as a way to get the budget balanced. That's the long haul. That's going to take years. That doesn't solve the immediate problem. In the near term, if they're going to raise it, like I said, I hope they don't, but if they're going to raise it, they need to get something meaningful and significant by way of starting the reform along what I've described. And I would start with some near-term entitlement reform or spending reform that's significant. Yes, sir.
I agree we got a spending problem in this country, but on the revenue side, how do you feel about raising taxes just a little bit on the wealthiest of Americans and closing some loopholes on some of the largest corporations? According to the national media, we're losing the public opinion on that discussion.
Well, if you just govern by the polls, then we might as well get a computer program, because then you don't need anybody actually leading. You can just put in the computer program saying, here's an average of the polls, and let the computer control it. I don't buy that at all. So I don't think it's the right thing to do, just look at a poll and say, because the polls say X, we should do X. We got to do the right thing. And it may not be popular in the early weeks, months, or days. But if you look at how we got into this mess, like I said at the onset, and you look at government revenues over time, what you'll see is government revenues kept up with the rate of growth in the private economy. But what you'll also see is government spending went way beyond that. Way beyond that. I'll give you one measure from Minnesota, but there's similar statistics federally. If you look at government spending in Minnesota, from 1960 until I became governor, the average 2-year increase in spending in my state was 21% every 2 years. 21% every 2 years. I don't know about you, but I bet you your paychecks aren't going up or your Social Security checks aren't going up anywhere close to that. And so you have spending that is out of control, revenues keeping pace. So which, as we talk about balance, as we talk about compromise, as we talk about how do we fix this, you got to understand how did we get here? And we got here because spending was out of control, not because revenues didn't keep up with the growth of the economy and the situation overall. And so I don't support raising taxes. Yes?
Thank you, Governor. I'm a college student, and that higher education is becoming increasingly important function in today's society. But it's not easy for a lot of families to send multiple kids to college. How would your administration make it more viable for every high school graduate to go to college?
Well, we did a number of things when I was governor, including trying to get credit for college while you're still in high school, a series of initiatives that allowed students on their own initiative, if they wanted to take AP classes or CLEP tests or various other courses, to get a running start on college. That's not the total solution, but that helps. Number two is I think we need to encourage colleges to be more efficient, because if you see the private economy growing 1 or 2% a year, hopefully more in the future, then you look at the colleges and you say, why are their costs going up not 2% a year, but 4, 6, 8, 10, 12? What is it about universities that have their costs going up a multiple of the private economy? And we need them to be more efficient. And I'll walk you through some of the things that are causing that. They have faculty and pay and benefit and pension and healthcare plans that are way better than the private sector in many instances. And those need to be brought into line. They need to be reformed. Number two, we can't have everybody thinking all the content is going to be delivered by a person in the future just standing at a whiteboard lecturing. As you know, I suspect, through your tablet or your laptop, the world is opening up in terms of digital content that is very exciting, not just in terms of Call of Duty 3, but Algebra 3. And so you can take the sights and sounds and images and pop-up tutorials and customization that comes with modern day technology and begin to deploy some of the classes through that medium. And it's extremely high quality. It's once you have it for one, you can provide it for the same price for 10,000. So think about not medical school, but think about Spanish 101, economics 101, psychology 101, and the like. There's a lot of courses that I believe we can offer as a voluntary option to students that can be offered at a lower price or help keep costs down that will meet at least some of the cost pressures. And then lastly, we got to have colleges and universities run more efficiently. We can't have a third of the faculty going on sabbatical every few years. They actually got to teach a good number of hours instead of teaching not many hours. We want them to do research, obviously, but we got to get more productivity out of the faculty as well. There's a lot of other issues, but you can't have the economy growing at 2% and the cost of college going up 10%. That math doesn't work. So they need to do their part to rein it in. So, ma'am, did you have a question here? You hand over there? Yeah, go ahead. I didn't mean to skip over you.
How do you feel about industry moving out of the country, and how is this affecting blue collar?
Now related back to the question, I think you had a China question attached, which I forgot to get to. Sorry about that. The question was, how do I feel about jobs moving out of the country or industry? Now keep in mind, I grew up in South St. Paul, as Mary mentioned. It was one of these 6- and 7-story meatpacking plants, and they all shut down summarily in the late 60s and 70s. So as a very young person, I saw the massive layoffs, massive dislocation, moms and dads in my community unemployed. My mom died when I was 16 of ovarian cancer. My dad was a truck driver for much of his life, although later on he got promoted to dispatcher. We thought we hit the jackpot as a family. and he lost his job, Bill, for a while. And so as a very young person, I saw very up close the face of what it means to lose these jobs and to have a town, recoil from that kind of impact, and then my own family being impacted, ultimately. So here's what I think about that. Number one, we need to be for free trade, but I'm not for being stupid. And we got people in the world now who cheat. And we need to have the strength and the clarity of our convictions to call them on. So I've been to China a number of times, and here's how it works in China if you are somebody who wants to do business accessing their 1.5 billion people, by the way, 5 times more people than we have. Or so let's pretend I'm the Chinese government and she is are you a reporter? I probably should put you in the skit then. Okay, she's a reporter. All right, we'll put you in the skit. So he wants to come to China and do business here. What's your name, sir? Bill. Well, I understand you want to come to China and sell to our 1.5 billion people, growing population and the like. Where's your plant in China going to be? How many employees are you going to employ who are Chinese? And by the way, Bill, how much capital equipment are you going to buy here in China? We'd like to make sure it's Chinese made or Chinese developed. And then by the way, do you have some technology, Bill? Because we'd like to see it. And as a condition of doing business in China, we want you to do business with your new local Chinese technology partner. What's your name, sir? The Reverend is going to be your new technology partner. And in order for you to do business here, you must share your technology with the Reverend. And by the way, if the Reverend is down the street 7 years from now competing against you with your former management team and all your technology, we don't protect intellectual property rights. Now, that's a little bit exaggerated for purposes of dramatic effect, but if you're in an industry that's of strategic interest to the Chinese government, that's about how it goes. Now, what do we do about that? Imagine if we turned the tables on them and said to them, oh, you want to do business in the United States and access our 330 million affluent American consumers? Where's your American plant? How many Americans are you going to be employing? How much are you going to invest in capital equipment and buildings in America? By the way, do you have some technology? Because we'd like to see it. And by the way, meet your new American technology partner. And by the way, if she steals your technology, we don't protect it in our court system. You're just out of luck. Now, that's again, over-exaggerated example for purposes of the effect, but the point is, we have to deal with China from strength. And guess who owns a big part of our debt right now? And you ever try to tell off your banker when they have your loan? Anybody ever done that? You ever have a loan that you're having a tough time paying or you want renewed, you walk into the bank and just tell off your banker? Probably doesn't work so well. So what we got to do is clean up our mess, get our own financial house in order, and then we need to compete and view China as a competitor. It needs to be a friendly competition, but the rules and the playing field have to be level. That's not what's happening now. And so we need to deal with them and others from a position of strength, but they're increasingly not respecting us. If you talk to people who've been to China, they think we're a country, and I've been there, you talk to government business leaders, they're increasingly thinking we're a country in decline. And then, we'll get to, sir, in just a second. And a country in decline, that we're weakening. And we need to come at them from a position of strength. I'm getting the hook, but I know you're anxious to get one more thing, and then we'll wrap up. Go ahead.
There was an industry in Marshalltown that went through that same process. China, now they bankrupt all business.
Yeah, what happens in China is, and I don't want to, again, overgeneralize, but companies make this deal. They think they can go in there and get a 5 or 10 year run at the Chinese consumer market, and because it's so large, they think it's worth it. Until, guess what happens? There's a new washer and dryer company down the street. It's not called Maytag, but it's called something else, and it looks a lot like a Maytag. And the people who used to work at the Chinese Maytag factory are now working at the new company's factory. And so, again, we need to make sure we're clear-eyed about what we're up against, and we need to make America attractive for investment. We need to make it competitive. We need to have lower, flatter, pro-growth, pro-investment, pro-job tax rates, but we also need to be strong on these trade issues. I know, guys, you got to go, but I'm getting the hook. Is something real quick, sir, on this?
Real quick. I went to work for the railroad 43 years ago, and I retired after 30 years.
Well, when I went to work for the railroad, I thought, well, I'll have railroad retirement. It won't be just Social Security. Well, then they threw it all into Social Security. Of course, we draw a little different. But now they're talking about we're not going to be able to pay Social Security. Well, who owns that money? That should be a separate account. They shouldn't get into that money.
Well, you own the money. You're right. You know, that's all over the years, over the decades, what they did, instead of having the money actually deposited and held in escrow, they started loaning it out to other arms of the government. So the government owes itself the money, which is kind of strange. But my view on Social Security, again, for anybody who's on the program, in retirement, near retirement, no changes. We made a promise to you, we need to keep it. That's really important. It's really important. But for the next generation coming up, we're going to have to tell them now, you know, again, decades worth of notice, changes are coming. See, I'm sorry, I know there are many more questions. I got to go, but I want to tell you thank you so much for taking the time to come on a hot weekday afternoon. It's not easy to get people to show up, and we're grateful that you're here. And I sure hope that you'll help our efforts on Ames on the 13th. And please, if you haven't signed up on the website, see one of these wonderful people in the back. They've got postcards. If you sign up, we'll get you all the information. We'll get you a ride there. We'll buy your ticket, all that good stuff. Take care of all the logistics, and you'll make a huge difference, not just for our campaign, but for the future of this country. Thanks for coming.
You guys all sign up for straw poll? That's where it's looking at straw.